Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. Today we're a little bit early because, by popular demand, we're finally getting around to doing the full show, the full interview of Ben Shapiro versus Neil deGrasse Tyson. Now, those of you who were around for the brief cut before, this is an older interview when Neil was doing his tour for Letters from an Astrophysicist. And I cut out the first part of the video because it's just the meet and greet. Hi, how you doing? Ben does an ad, and then how did Neil become a scientist? It's not a horrible story, but it's not really the interaction between the two that we're looking for here. And holy crap, it's long anyway. That's why we had to start early, so we can be done in time for, as per usual, Bad Science Sunday immediately following this show. So do stick around. If you haven't seen Bad Science Sunday, definitely stick around because it is one of the best things on YouTube. And if you're new here, please take a minute to hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel a lot, and you'll get more really cool content, as cool as I can make anyway. And yeah, it helps, so I appreciate it. Okay, so I see a bunch of people have showed up even though we're early. I see Star Song was here early, and that's always good to see. And Michael, hello, and the Unlucky Legume, welcome. And yeah, that's another good reason to hit subscribe. If you would like to join us in the live chat, we'd love to see you. Ring the bell, get your notifications, you'll know whenever we go live. But I'm usually here most Sunday afternoons. 8-ish, yeah, 8 Eastern. Normally, but this week we're early. Yes, I know how things work. It's fine. All right, all that said, let's get started, shall we? It's normally I hate to interrupt so soon, but it seems like I do it all the time. This right out of the gate, the theist goes after the scientist saying, "Where's the meaning?" It hurts my head in so many different ways because searching for answers is a meaning, but also who says there has to be a meaning, and many other possibilities. But let's give Dr. Tyson a chance to answer. Sound. What? Oh, you can't hear the video. Okay, let me see what I can do about that. Video. Video. Where's the video? It is set to, it's on the proper setting. Let me double check that we have the, okay, let me switch screens here and see if I can get it to play nice. Once I find the proper screen, there's a lot of stuff in my OBS, just in case anyone was wondering. I have so many scenes and so many parts. Apparently you can still hear me. My video levels tell me so. Let's see. All right, we've got the audio monitoring on. Okay, let me go back over here, and then we'll try it again, and let me know how this goes. Nothing? Maybe? Maybe not? Is it not? Oh, I may know what's happening. Let me, where is it? Okay. So right now, my mic's live and the video is muted because it's paused. When I do this, it should reverse.
I think it's...
And now, okay, so it's just not muting and unmuting the way it should be. I'll just leave it unmuted and we should be good. Okay, live broadcasting, folks. All right, let's take it from the top one more time.
Maybe that's okay for some people, but those who look for meaning, typically it comes with some assumption that, oh, there's the meaning. It's behind the chair, okay? Or under a rock, or behind a tree. It implies that meaning is something out there that you search for and then may one day find.
And that's an excellent point, because it implies that you don't already have meaning. There isn't a meaning that you can grasp or contextualize, and that there's only one possible meaning, and who's to say what it is, or that once you've found the meaning, you can stop looking. And that's it. It's just not good with science in many different ways.
For me, meaning is something you create. You have the power to create meaning in your life and in the lives of others. Can you lessen the suffering of another person? That creates meaning. It creates purpose. It creates mission for who you are and what you might do in life. So for me, as an academic, I care that I learn something every day. If a day goes by and I don't learn something, that's a wasted day.
I know a number of people who share that sentiment. I often do the same myself. I have a slightly different perspective these days. I do prefer to learn things every day, and more than one thing if possible. But I don't really think of it as a wasted day anymore, because there's so much else going on, so many other things in life at the very least. Every day is one more step along the path towards whatever it is that your goal might be. And that's pretty fantastic in and of itself. But yeah, I overall I agree with Dr. Tyson that meaning, like many things in life, is something that we create. We don't just find it and acquire it. It's like happiness in that respect, because you don't ever get happiness from the outside, not really. You can get moments of joy or feelings of acceptance or welcome or belonging or other positive emotions. But to have lasting happiness, you have to make it yourself. And meaning is in that same ballpark. It's what makes you feel like your life has meaning, or purpose if you prefer.
I want to go back, recapture the day, and rummage through the books to find something. And ideally, you should get your mind blown at least once a week.
Giggity, giggity.
By just something, whoa, I never knew that. And so for me, that is where I get, that is how I establish and derive meaning in my life.
So, I mean, maybe I should redefine the terms. Maybe meaning, I should be using the word purpose, which is a word I like to talk about a lot.
They're related, I think.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I mean, in my book, I talk about, the relationship between meaning and purpose, and I suggest that people do have to have purpose in order to find meaning.
Leave it to Ben to start redefining things as soon as he gets any pushback. My goodness. So, yeah, from Ben's perspective, purpose is related to, but different from meaning. You have to have it, or your life apparently doesn't count, and it has to come from the outside. It's kind of a crappy way to look at the world, in my personal opinion.
I guess the question remains that when you look to finding a purpose, why should we be looking to the random assortment of guts or the evolutionarily beneficial firing of neurons for?
I'm reminded of a saying, only a fool thinks that life has but one purpose. But also, not only are there many purposes, some of them are obvious. Ben himself is a bioessentialist. He believes that the purpose of all living things is to reproduce. That's an evolutionary purpose. Is just one good enough? Do you have to even justify your own existence? Do you have to play a role, some greater social benefit, or you're not worth having around? I don't think so.
Purpose, and how does that relate to questions like morality or the moral good?
What's interesting about your set of questions there is that they're in at least half a dozen letters written to me. You are not alone in that sentiment. So I think it's not obvious in just a cursory review of science. You think to yourself, this is dispassionate, cold facts about the universe, the world, nature. That is not where I'm turning if I got to find meaning in life. However,
yeah, there's something to be said for that. We don't look at asteroids and comets to try to find meaning in our lives. like facts about them, their size, their composition, those could have some utility someday, but they don't really reflect much on what we're doing down here for the most part.
Consider that the atoms in your body were manufactured in the cores of stars billions of years ago. Stars that exploded. If they didn't, these atoms would be locked away forever. They exploded, scattering that enrichment across the galaxy. And out of that enrichment forms planets, life, people. And so when you look up in the night sky, if you feel small and lonely, the knowledge that you're connected in this way to the stars, that we are not just figuratively, we're literally stardust, can give you a sense of belonging in what might otherwise come across to you as a cold and heartless universe.
And that is a fantastic perspective, because so often, especially when we're talking to theists, we get this idea that the universe is set up for death, not for life. You know, you can't survive in space. You can't survive on the sun. You can't survive on any other planet in our solar system without significant technological support. The universe doesn't like life, it seems. And so that can make you feel small and isolated. But on the flip side, it's those impersonal, uncaring effects happening out in the cold and calculating distance reaches of the cosmos that make life possible, at least life as we see it today. And that's kind of cool. The perspective thing, I've heard it posed a couple of different ways. Like, people look out into the universe and see the stars and know that our sun is one of the smaller along the main sequence. And they think how ridiculously big our galaxy is, our universe is, and how truly tiny we all are. But I've also heard it the other way around. If you think of where you are in here on Earth, and you think about all the bacteria that you can't even see with the naked eye, and all the molecules running around inside their cellular processes, RNAs, catalyzing reactions and proteins being built and formed, and the atoms that those are made of, and all the things going on inside the atoms, the spinning quarks and the dancing leptons and whatnot. It's all so very, very tiny. And by comparison, you're huge. So, as with many things, it's a matter of perspective.
It is a beautiful idea and a beautiful sentiment. I know Michael Shermer's written a lot about this sort of belief as well. In your book and in your other writings, you've talked about, you know, the application of science to questions of morality. And I guess the question that I have when I hear something like that is, that's a romantic way of putting the idea that we're meatballs in space. That basically
We're romantic.
Ben is so eloquent. Yeah, we can. I've had, this has come up a number of times recently. Apparently, a particularly unpleasant theist has put out a video condemning how atheists can't have morality, that it's only, you know, our opinions. We've heard that somewhere before. But the truth is that the only way to really ground morality is based on facts and reason, which I think Ben has a saying along those lines that he really enjoys. Basing it on a mythology, even if it were a moral mythology, doesn't really work. You have to ground it in things along the lines of human flourishing versus human suffering, or living things flourishing versus living things suffering. Or there's a number of different options, but they can be objective and they can be more accurate than any mythological-based system.
Meatball.
Yeah, exactly. We're Spinoza's stone that's sort of thrown, and then we have this bizarre awareness that we've been thrown, but there's nothing we can do about it. And
By the way, you are the first ever talk show host to mention Spinoza.
oh, well, thank you, I guess.
Famous Jewish philosopher.
Right, exactly. And probably, you know, pantheist, maybe the first open atheist.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But
First atheist Jew.
yeah, exactly.
It started
Publicly,
a great
yeah.
long tradition of atheist Jews.
Yeah, I mean, we can argue about how great it is, but Marx is in that tradition too. It didn't end great. But in any case, when we
Marx.
Talk about, that particular moral question or the purpose-driven question. In your book, you talk about how you think a moral system can be derived from science. And you sort of assume that moral systems, the thriving of humans, the same way that Sam Harris or Michael Shermer talks about it, that is...
Yeah, precisely. It's a little bit of a cringe that he mentions Sam Harris and Michael Shermer. But, like I said, this interview was from a few years ago. And the more problematic those people become, the more they're on Ben's side. So, details.
Sort of a given, and that we all define thriving in the same way. And you're very critical, obviously, of Judeo-Christian religion particularly.
Well, no, I wouldn't put it that way. I would say if you're trying to fight me using Judeo-Christian religious texts, if you're trying to fight me about the nature of the physical universe...
No, that's idiotic.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
No, that's idiotic.
Even Ben agrees that's idiotic. It's fun, though, the way he says you're aware of the Judeo-Christian religion. Ben's trying to put himself in the same camp as the Christian nationalists. And possibly with good reason, because the last time we had a movement of nationalists like that, the Jewish part of Judeo-Christian was rather high up on their hit list.
Right. But otherwise, I'm not going to... If Jesus is your savior, if Moses is your man, I'm not taking that away from you. I have no intentions on taking that away from you. There are letters in here from Jews, from Muslims. This Buddhist wrote in, and the corpus of those where people like to sort of tussle with religion tend to be fundamentalist Christians. So there's a chunk of letters in there as well. But each of them have a different reason for coming to me. And so the conversation is different. One of them says, is there any way the universe can be 6,000 years old? Just please, help me out here. I want to...
Help me, Dr. Tyson. You're my only hope. Now, there is one way that the universe could be 6,000 years old. There's one way that it could be, created last Tuesday. It was made recently, and then the time before that moment of creation was created retroactively. And if you do have an all-powerful God, then doing something that ridiculous would be within that God's power. But the problem with an all-powerful God is it starts to run into incoherencies pretty quickly. But that's a whole other topic.
Try to get and as you know, 6,000 years is the canonical biblical age if you run through the begats of Genesis. And the begats in Genesis? What
yes,
book
they are.
Are they? Thank you. Mm-hmm. So I don't think science hands you morality, but I think science informs morality. And that's an important connection that I don't think people commonly make today. There's a lot to know about life, about, people debating abortion, people debating issues related to human physiology and health. Mm-hmm. Well, what do you know about the nervous system? What do we know about consciousness? What do we know about, in the brain, the neurosynaptic connections?
And beyond that, what can we learn from where we are now? What can we make a hypothesis out of? What can we test? Should we be making declarations based on our feels, or should we be using the solid information we can verify? These things often put actual morality, ethical ethics, if you will, into direct contradiction with some of these very ancient religious traditions. But that's also sort of a separate talk. Let's see what's going on. I notice a bunch of people have showed up. I trust that the audio is working properly now. Okay, let's see. I see. Michael, I don't know if I said hello to you yet, but hello. Reggie, yeah. I did just come from Beck's myself. What the Beck does a Sunday stream every week. I usually have to leave early for my show, but yeah, it's a fun place to hang out with no talk of religion and very little politics, and so it's fun to hang out there. On a related note, Joe the Kentucky Atheist was also in Beck's stream, And Joe is something like 30 away from 1,000 on his channel. So if you feel so inclined, he does have some very interesting content, from old stuff about Kenneth Copeland being a crazy person to new stuff involving interviews with Matt Dillahunty, Aaron Ra, and others, and a bunch of stuff in between. Maybe consider checking out the Kentucky Atheist channel and giving them a sub so they can hit that marker and get the tools unlocked, like the live redirect that I personally love so much. It'd be helpful for them. Yeah. And anything that helps the community is good for all of us, you know? In my opinion. Hillhugger, hello, hello. Good to see ya. Chrissy, glad you made it. Let's see. Maya, hello, says it's never too soon to interrupt. That's true. Especially when you've got somebody like Ben who goes really, really fast when he can get away with it. So, you know, I see Spooky, switching screens. Yes, absolutely. Spooky with the Splatoon character, I see. Let's see. Am I missing anybody? I might be. I could be. It happens from time to time. I'm scrolling through the comments because there's a lot of people saying hello or that things are working good and so forth. Star says, by participating in these discussions, I hope that something I say will be helpful to somebody. I appreciate it. You never know. Sometimes, every now and then, once in a great while, I say something that's helpful to somebody. And that makes a great deal of difference to me. You might say that's one place I find meaning. Michael says, Ben sounds like he just sucked down some helium. Yes, the playback speed is turned up a little bit. I didn't want to turn it up too much because Ben already talks so damn fast. But for a variety of reasons, it's usually wise to turn up the playback speed on a video at least a little bit. It helps cut down the runtime at the very least. Let's see. Star also says, having watched Star Talk, Niel is speaking faster here than I'm used to hearing him. That may be partly the playback speed, but I suspect it's also because he's talking with Ben, and Ben talks very, very fast. That's his one superpower. So Niel may be trying to keep up, perhaps. I don't know. Robert, good to see you. Glad you could make it. And Katina, hello, hello. Yes, spelling is hard. Absolutely. Jimmy, glad to see you. Caught you earlier at JL Warren's show on Discord. English is hard, folks. Every third Sunday, JL goes into the politics server and does a stage of reason. Today was a little bit spicy, but yeah, Tux TV got up on stage and gave them a nice reprieve from pre-sups and shroud apologists and other crazy people, and that was pretty cool. Star says, I can't help with TKA. I'm already subbed. I mean, you could hit the sub button again and see what happens. Yes, Spooky Splatoon. That would be a cool channel name. Or possibly a bar? I don't know. Jedi, good to see ya. Hello, hello. Yes, Ben Chipmunk, for sure. And one of these days I'll get the pronunciation right. Letefte, I think. Maybe. Anyway, hello. Good to see you. All right, let's dive back in here.
If a part of this brain gets damaged, you don't even know who you are. If another part gets damaged, you can't speak. Another gets damaged, you can't recognize a face. And that's kind of important information about how we're going to handle what happens to people, right? It informs
sure.
it. Now you can have your morality panels, or whatever they're called, you know, the people who advise politicians or whatever.
Don't we call it a morality market? Is that how we do it? Because everything's capitalism? I don't know. Maybe I'm silly.
Ethics
right,
panels, they're called.
Right.
And so, but don't believe that a scientist shouldn't be in that room.
No, I certainly believe that scientists should be in the room to provide the additional information necessary to fill out the application of moral principles.
Yes, I agree.
I guess that my question becomes, when we're talking about the original initiation of moral principle, why should we believe that science can do that?
I've never said that.
Why should we believe anything else, Ben? I mean, what else but science? Our best mechanism for generating answers to questions we have ever devised. Why should we use anything else?
And
Yeah.
I think that there's a very strong David Hume is ought problem.
Well, yeah, except if you look at what we consider to be moral principles today, it is, especially in communities where they say we have Judeo-Christian foundations for society, there's a lot of editing out
For sure.
of what went on in the Bible versus what we value and judge today. And so you can ask, what
Imagine skirting that close to biblical slavery while talking to a black astrophysicist. Woof.
is the foundation of the editing? And this really is traceable to secular discussion about our understanding about civilization, about people, about how we treat each other, one another. And so, when you look at Darwin and learn, of course, there are people, social Darwinists, which fed Nazism, right, and eugenics. But you part through those curtains. At the bottom of Darwin is the fact that we are all genetically connected. That's profound. It means we have different skin color, but we are fundamentally identical as a species, okay?
Okay, I called out Ben for his near miss. I suppose I should call out Niel for his, mentioning eugenics, which led to, the practices of a certain mid-20th century Central European nation's war crimes. In front of a Jewish guy is a bit of an oof, but maybe Niel's just, fair is fair, returning fire, saying I can play that game of subtlety too. Yeah.
And, to a jellyfish, they will not be able to tell us apart if we're a jellyfish. So the commonality of DNA among all humans, the commonality of DNA among all life on Earth, that is stupefying. That has value. And the is and the ought question, I don't have a problem with that as a starting place, but generally people who come at it from an is and an ought, in other words, science can tell you what is true, but they can't tell you what should be true.
Right.
Just to paraphrase,
Yes.
to condense.
Clarifying, because I missed it. Yeah,
To
exactly.
condense.
Sort of, in some cases. If you want to get into the philosophy of it, it's true you cannot get an ought from an is. Or more precisely, you can't get an is from an ought. What should be doesn't tell you what is. But that's philosophy bro stuff, if you will. What we can do is say, if our goal is thus, we want to, reduce global warming so that we aren't causing famines that starve half the human population, then we ought to do this. It's not so much an ought in the moral sense as an ought in a it logically follows kind of sense. Like, if you want to have a phone battery that lasts all day, then you ought to recharge it. You should plug it in, because that's the process. It just, here's the steps. If you want the goal, follow the process. And science can do that for us.
I think they both still have to happen together.
So we're talking about how to construct a morality or how to live within a moral system.
Mm-hmm.
And you've suggested, I think rightly, that the effect of reason on religious principle as inherited over time has purified many of those principles, made those principles better, made for a better world. I totally agree with that, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the way that I've put it with regard to civilization myself is that civilization is a suspension bridge, basically, between a pole that is certain fundamental assumed premises that can't be proved by science, and then science and reason. And the fact is that where I start to get a little afraid is if the pull of science and reason begins to believe that it is self-perpetuating and we lose some of the fundamental principles. So the example that I would give is...
Oh, I see where he's going. I'm like, it sounds like Ben's trying to turn black and white thinking into a spectrum without understanding what the hell he's doing. But the way he says fundamental principles, the first time, it sounds like he's talking about things like the laws of logic or the principles of consistency, where, gravity here is the same as gravity on Mars, is the same as gravity on Wolf 359, etc. That's not the same as what Ben was saying the second time. which is the foundational principles such as God first and do what holy books say or be burned at the stake, that sort of thing. Yeah, those foundational principles we're definitely pulling away from because we never actually needed them and they're harmful.
You mentioned Darwinism before. It is perfectly plausible and, in fact, fairly easy to read social Darwinism into Darwinism, and people did for several generations. And so now we say,
at least 2 generations.
Exactly. And so now we say, okay, that never should have happened. Obviously, that's wrong. That's a bad read of Darwinism. There's no reason you have to read evolution to suggest that we should benefit certain people at the expense of other people. But that is a
Well, it's a justification. It's very similar to eugenics. It's people taking what they wanted to be true and then grabbing onto whatever science was available at the time to try to justify that position, even though the science didn't actually apply to the thing they were talking about. It's screwy because the idea that some people should benefit at the expense of everyone else, that's literally capitalism. That's what Ben is in favor of all the time. He is a capitalist. So when he says we shouldn't apply these concepts because of the harm they do, I don't think he knows what he's talking about.
A moral reading of Darwin, not a reading of Darwin that is inherent in Darwin itself. Meaning that is bringing premises that actually pre-exist Darwin to bear on that, if properly read.
It's bringing bias,
right,
which humans are highly susceptible to, and especially in the social sciences. So there's less bias in the sciences that don't involve human behavior. You can still have bias, there's just less of it. And the consequences are less dire if anything that happens becomes policy. And so,
well, I mean, you know, as I've said many times, I don't agree with everything Dr. Tyson says, and this is one of those examples. Like, that's the kind of thing, that's system one thinking. That's what pops into your head in the moment, but it doesn't actually hold up on further examination. For example, nuclear weapons, that doesn't have anything to do with personal interaction or our own behavior necessarily. It's just pure science. Can we cause this sort of thing to happen? A rampant chain reaction that will create a thermonuclear detonation event. But it turns out that it did have titanic repercussions for the entire world and the whole human race. So just because it's not social science doesn't mean it doesn't matter or that there won't be biases.
So that's the digested analysis of what came out of Darwinism. But yeah.
Yeah, so I think the reason that this comes up is there was one tweet that you sent, of course, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. There's this one tweet that you sent that drew an enormous amount of ire on particularly the right about rationalia, that you were looking forward to the...
I remember rationalia.
Oh, yeah. So first of all, what would rationalia... So this is for those who missed the tweet, the suggestion was...
This is like 3 years ago now.
It was a fascinating conversation because it began this whole kind of discussion about what a well-governed system would look like or who would govern that system. And so...
I'm curious what the hell they're talking about. And of course, this video, again, is several years old, and the tweet was several years old then, so I'm going to try to Google it. Niel DeGrasse Tyson, rationalia tweet. Let's see what happens. Okay, we got a hit, and it says... Okay, it is, yeah, it's from 2016. Let me go back over into this window, and I will try to screen share so we can all read it together. So y'all don't think I might be misrepresenting or what have you. All right. And click this button. There we go. See how that works? I'm very tiny now. I'm a window inside a window. It says, Earth needs a virtual country, rationalia, with a one-line constitution. All policy shall be based on the weight of evidence. Again, I don't necessarily agree. I mean, on the surface, it sounds good. But there are definitely going to be situations where the evidence may not lead in a pro-social direction or a human positive direct. Like, for example, if you were going to base policy purely on the weight of evidence that's available right now, it is uncontestable that humankind is a blight upon this planet. We are hurting the environment. We're driving species extinct. We're doing tremendous amounts of damage in tremendous amounts of ways on unbelievable scales. So, based on the weight of that evidence, the best thing we could do is to eradicate all humans. That's what happens when all policy is based on pure evidence. And, that's one of the more obvious problematic conclusions. So I don't think that's a great way to go. We may want to have like a little bit of human compassion, a little bit of human empathy tempering these things. Yeah, it's anytime you go with absolutes, you're going to run into trouble virtually immediately. And that's a great example of why. Speaking of, Robert says, we should not just believe things. Well, except for religion. Yeah. And that's true for science too. We shouldn't just believe things. We should verify things. We should contextualize things. We should think about the bigger picture. And we shouldn't make all our decisions just based on an algorithm. What's the point of having free will, if you will? See last night's debate review with Mark Reed for more on the free will discussion, because that was fucking fascinating. Daniel Dennett versus Robert Sapolsky on whether free will exists. Great conversation. Katina says, what the hell did I just miss? I believe that was when Ben was saying that civilization is founded on biblical principles, hinting in the general direction of biblical slavery to a black man. And that's... Woo! So, I mean, partial credit to Ben. That was really, really subtle. But Niel caught it and fired right back. And yeah, well done. Well done. Let's see. Kamikaze, hello, hello. Good to see you. Glad you could make it. And I see you're enjoying the custom emojis. Fantastic. Love to see it. Tenebris, hello. Ben Shapiro's eyebrows could stop an ROG. ROG, rapid open gator. Nom nom nom. Nom nom. Gators are all mouth. They're very dangerous. And a rapid one. That sounds terrifying. I don't know. No, I'm not sure what ROG is. Oh, RPG. Okay, that makes more sense. My goodness. Yeah, Ben has attack eyebrows, much like Peter Capaldi. Although I think Peter Capaldi's are better. Top Tester, good to see you. Hello, hello. My throat's getting a little dry. Can you tell I haven't spoken all day? Jedi says, werewolf legends hold that people with a unibrow could be a lycanthrope. Can't rule it out. I've never seen Ben under a full moon. Kamikaze says, that was the premise of Agent Smith of the Matrix, wasn't it? I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You're a plague and we are the cure. Yeah, okay. Now I see what it's in reference to. After a fashion. Although you'll notice that in the world of the Matrix, the planet didn't really look any better. But there have been a lot of properties that contend that humans are effectively a disease upon the Earth. And in some ways, it's true. A lot of biologists have said the sixth mass extinction is underway, and it's us. It's not a volcano. It's not an asteroid. It's humans. We're very good at wiping things out.
I don't want to miss what exactly you were saying.
Sure.
Why don't you suggest it?
So, book note that expands on the Rationalia tweet. And she had the idea of having a place called Rational Land, Okay, and I said, no, we need a better name than rational land. So rationalia, right? You have Somalia, Serbia, rationalia, and
Why not Rationalistan? I don't know. If we're going to name stuff weird things, why not?
the premise in this room of people, this is a conference of scientists and artists, actually, was that imagine a community. It could be virtual, doesn't have to have geographic boundaries, where all laws are created only on the strength of evidence in support of them. Period.
That's not what the tweet said, but I think it's better than what the tweet said, so, credit there.
All laws. Now, if you think about that, that has very sound principles, because especially in America, especially in America, we've got a diversity of cultures, religions, other kinds of belief systems. And we're technically supposed to celebrate that. E pluribus unum, right? Many is one, or one is many, right? Out of many, one. Thank you. And so you were polite to let me figure it out. He's going to get it? He's going to get it? Okay, I'll help him out. Very polite of you.
The palaver is, I don't know. In some ways it's charming, on others it's just, maybe it's my bias against Ben Shapiro, because it seems like everything he's involved with leaves a sour taste in my mouth. And so even though I can see Dr. Tyson is being good-humored about it, it falls flat. It rings hollow on Ben's end, but that may be my bias. I don't know.
So in such a place, if I had some belief system based on my religion or culture or whatever, and I rise to political power and I want to make a law, the laws apply to everyone in the land. But if that law derives from my belief system, and now I force others into that law, that's a recipe for disaster. That is.
Well, okay, so I see what he's getting at. Like, if his belief system says abortions are evil, and then he wants to pass that belief onto everyone through the force of law, that's not cool. That's very not cool. It puts people's lives in danger for the sake of a belief they do not hold. Very not cool. But on the flip side, you can't make any policy that isn't in some fashion based on your own beliefs. For example, guaranteeing people the right to abortion, the right to bodily autonomy. You would only do that if you believe that is a good thing to do.
That is how to guarantee an unstable culture, unstable civilization. It destabilizes civilization. So the idea is any law that applies to everybody needs to be based on some objective truths. And how do you establish objective truths? The best way we know is by the methods and tools of science. And the strength of the law would be commensurate with the strength of the evidence to support it. And if you don't have the evidence to support it, you have no business making a law for it. So that would be...
That part I agree with. If you don't have the evidential basis to support making a policy, law, constitutional amendment, what have you, that should be grounds for dismissal right there. If you can't back it up, you should shove it up.
The premise. And then some people jumped in the... I don't read every one. You probably don't either, because you...
No. No.
Talk about pissing off the internet. You're king of pissing off the internet. Try to drag me into this.
Exactly. Welcome to my lair.
All right. So how would this work? So a lot of the debates centered on, well, who's going to decide what's true? Enough to base a law on it. And other people didn't see my actual words. There's a lot of reading comprehension issues I've noticed. I said...
That's the understatement of the last decade, for sure. My goodness. Wowzers. Yeah, we run into that a lot. The who's going to decide what's true. Well, that's the thing about science, is you don't have to decide, because you can determine, and maybe you get it wrong, but that's why other people verify your results. It can be done objectively. That's the actual point.
Objective truth And people read that as absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the word I used. And people said, who's to decide what is absolute truth? And there's no such thing as an absolute truth. And I never said that.
Right.
And there's a difference. I'm not convinced there's an absolute truth.
I wonder if the people who say there's no such thing as an absolute truth think that that is absolutely true. Because if the statement itself isn't an absolute truth, then I guess Frank Turek wins the internet or something. Let's not go there. It's a weird, self-contradictory statement.
Science establishes what is true based on evidence, and that seems to work. But there could be later evidence that gets to a deeper truth, and we're open to that. That's how we went from Newton to Einstein.
Right.
Newton's.
Yeah, it has to be. You have to do things that way because there's evidence that's easy to see and there's evidence that's not so easy to see. So we always have to bear in mind that when we make a decision based on evidence, whether it's in science or law or whatever, there is always evidence that we don't have, that we haven't been able to find, that we can't yet detect, whatever the case may be. And so no decision can be made without an asterisk on the end that it's subject to later review.
Still works. You took physics for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You still use Newton's equations, but there are situations where they don't apply. They break down, and you need a bigger story. So in comes Einstein, draws a bigger circle around the Newtonian physics, and so now Einstein has a deeper understanding of the universe, but it doesn't negate Newton in the regime in which it had previously applied. It still applies. And I was going to jump in and continue, but it got very...
Well, you have a life to live. I mean, that's...
I got a wife, I got kids,
Exactly.
I want to eat, So, but I'm glad it's...
Now that is an important lesson from Dr. Tyson. When people on the internet are wrong, there's food, there's family and friends. In his case, there's a big old planetarium, all of which are much better ways to spend your time.
It introduced some kind of thinking about what kinds of forces should operate on laws that we all must obey.
So I think that there were two well-founded criticisms. There were a lot of poorly founded criticisms. I think there were two well-founded critiques, I should say.
And by the way, there are letters in this book that are asking about morality.
Right.
They come from a religious, they don't make a big deal of what religion they're from. Generally, they're Christian, but they want to have a sort of secular conversation.
Yeah, for sure. No, the book is great, by the way.
Yeah.
And that is a fantastic way to drop an extra plug-in for the book. Marvelous, marvelous. And I will take that opportunity to also put in a plug for yet another channel. This one I'm, personally invested in. With all the noise, pseudoscience, and political rhetoric clogging the airwaves about transgender people, it can be difficult to understand what's really happening and what's really true. Good news, everyone! Welcome to The Transpositions, your compass in the rugged landscape of transgender issues. Here, we strive to be the beacon of authenticity, providing a platform that amplifies the voices and experiences of the transgender community. From breaking news to in-depth features to breaking down the real science, we are committed to fostering understanding, empathy, and empowerment for all individuals across the gender spectrum. Join us as we navigate the complexities, celebrate the triumphs, and advocate for the rights of transgender people worldwide. Together, we can redefine boundaries, challenge stereotypes, and champion inclusivity. Subscribe today. The link is in the description. All right. I don't know. I like to play that ad whenever I can, and if it fits in, I'm gonna do it.
And they come to it from a religious background, but they just want to find out where science comes from. And I want to hear the rest of your question, but I just want to say that these letters, these are people who want to have the conversation.
Yeah.
There are plenty who just don't. And I never see those letters.
And listen, as a religious person who is constantly discussing issues in the public eye, I won't cite the Bible as proof of positions. I don't think that is a valuable source in terms of being able to discuss with people. It's an appeal to authority that a huge...
Wouldn't it be funny if we went back on some of Ben's debates with college students, the thing he got to be famous for, and found him citing the Bible to back up his position? Surely we couldn't find any such videos like that.
Number of people don't accept. I mean, it's
Right.
no better than just citing any other random person on the street for a lot of folks.
Right.
So what difference does that make? But I think that when it came to the rationality tweet, there were two critiques that I saw that I thought were interesting.
Tell me,
with
yeah.
him. So one was that the question isn't, should we bring the best data to bear when making a law? Like, everybody who has any shred of rationality should, of course, want the best data to be brought to bear. The question when we make...
I am so glad he said that any reasonable person would want the best data to make the most rational decisions. And here we are with Ben backing up politicians who are doing the opposite of that. So what's up with that, Ben?
The law is one of competing values, meaning you're assuming that everybody has the same ends in mind, and that isn't always the case. So to take an obvious example, let's say that there were evidence that removing all guns in the United States would lower violent crime in the United States. So do you remove all guns from people in the United States? That is actually a question of values, not purely a question of whether a law would be effective in achieving a particular end, because the end itself is one of the questions. Do you want a society where no one has the capacity to protect themselves against a tyrannical government, for example?
Right. So I would say,
Yes, we're going to defend ourselves from totalitarian dictatorship with 22s and shotguns. Even AR-15s are useless against the American military. If the army turned on us, what are you going to do with a tank? What are you going to do with, an F-35 fighter jet? It's just, that's freaking ridiculous. No, the Second Amendment is, it's from a bygone age. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not an anti-gun nut. I think the gun situation in the U.S. is way the fuck out of hand. But as things stand right now, people do need access to guns to protect themselves from the other people with guns. Because, as we've seen in movie after movie, your set of carving knives in the kitchen will not save you from a person with a .45. That said, if we could get the number of guns in the country under control, it would definitely be a safer country.
that as posed, that makes complete sense. But that's not how I would have posed it. The way you pose it is there something you want as a society to turn into law? What would that be? Okay? And then you would test to see whether that will fulfill your objectives. If it will fulfill your objectives, then you put it into law. That's how you do this. You don't say, I want to get rid of all guns, let's make it a law. No, you ask collectively, in a democracy, the republic in which we live, you ask, what are your goals? Is your goal to have fewer people die from guns? Is that the goal? How would we accomplish this goal? And then you do the research and you find out, oh, you can have biometric handles. It reads my handprint, so my gun is my gun. You steal my gun, you can't use it.
And incidentally, that's super easy to do. We absolutely can have weapons with handles that read fingerprints. We have it in our smartphones already. Fingerprint scans to unlock. Or it can read a number of different factors. It's not impossible to have it check for a particular genetic marker, but that one, as high-tech as it sounds, it's not infallible, because anybody else with that particular genetic marker, who knows how many people might have it, that person could use your gun and then you'd get blamed for it. So that's bad news. But there are ways, and they are doable. They're very feasible. But we don't want to do that because it makes guns harder, and it makes doing crimes with guns harder to hide. And for all the pluses and minuses in our society that have to do with gun violence, the powers that be don't want to do anything that would discourage anyone from gun ownership. So it's a bit of an oof, but we absolutely could do that. Let's see, we've got a few chats building up here. Kamikaze says it was the same with Alex O'Connor, the cosmic skeptic, when he had a discussion with Ben Shapiro this year. They had to be cordial or the interview wouldn't go out. And yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. You may recall I recently did an interview where there was the other person and I were in extreme disagreement on a number of issues, but for the most part, we managed to be cordial. And I think that's important because you get a lot farther that way. Even if you wind up not agreeing, you can still at least have the conversation that way. Because if you just go off the handle and wind up, storming out or throwing the other person out or whatever the case may be, you're never going to hear the answers to your questions, and you're never going to get to ask most of your questions, So pluses and minuses. Sometimes people do need to be stomped on or chucked out in the cold or whatever. But more often than not, the more you can keep a conversation cordial, the better off your end results will be if you're prepared. But that's a whole long discussion in and of itself. Same with Lion Bill Craig. Yeah, gotta put the bar on the floor with Craig. That's an underrated point that people strum in against science. Things overturned don't just stop working for what they were addressing, but they may not apply to new areas. That was a minute ago, so I'm not sure exactly what that's in reply to. But yeah, I mean, hell, that's how evolution works, is we take, not intentionally, biology does it for us, but we take existing infrastructure, existing abilities, cellular components, tissues, whatever, and through adaptation start to apply them to new purposes. And that can be applied in other non-evolutionary areas. Our civilizations work that way. As conditions change, a civilization either has to adapt or it gets overthrown by another civilization that handles the new environment better. It's kind of neat. Hello, Robin. Good to see ya. Tenebris says, metaphorical facts. Hell yeah. Is it a fact about a metaphor, or a metaphor about a fact, or something that's only a fact in the metaphorical sense, or something that's only metaphorical in the factual sense? There's a lot of possibilities with a phrase like that. Robin says, violent crime has gone down significantly since Trump was voted out. Shock and surprise. So I recorded a play a few years ago, and this may be popping up on the Transpositions channel that was just mentioned in the ad and is linked in the description. Maybe not, maybe it will, I don't know. It's up in the air. But there's a scene in there where a trans woman gets confronted by a couple of thugs. They don't know she's trans, and as they begin assaulting her, they pull her wig off. And they go, oh shit, it's a man. And the other one says, kill it, the president says we can. And sadly, those lines aren't out of character for what was happening at the time. It's a big frickin' oof. So yeah, I can absolutely believe violent crime has gone down a lot since we've, gotten a sane person in the White House. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of what the current president has done is underwhelming or outright bad. But he's not an irrational toddler throwing a tantrum. So there's that at least. Top Tester, hello, good to see you. Robin says, you gotta love dingbats who think they are gonna fight the U.S. military. Uh-huh. Yeah, Robin has guns. To protect from the MAGA people, not the army. Yeah. Absolutely. Let's see. Kamikaze says, yeah, that's ridiculous. You don't find the army. Absolutely. Tenebris says, to be fair, the worst gun violence is on deep blue state cities with the most strict gun laws. Oh, in the cities. I think yes. Well, I shouldn't say yes, because that's system one thinking. That's intuition that's not based on data. From what I've heard from news reports, that seems to be true. And that's another reason that I would never be for an absolute ban of all guns, as Ben previously suggested. Us loony lefty people who are actually conservatives, as he might be implying. Because, as people have said for years and years, When you outlaw guns, then only the outlaws have the guns. The criminals don't really care what the law is because they're breaking it anyway. And it's stupid to not have any restrictions on guns because of that possibility, but it's also very silly and overly optimistic to try to ban all guns without bearing that in mind. Let's see. Darsung says, I'd be more likely to hit myself than my target if I had a gun. One of the hazards of not having the best health. Yeah, that's a very good point. Like, just having a gun isn't safe. It isn't the best way to deal with problems. It isn't an end-all equalizer solution. You also have to be able to use it, to know how to use it, and then there's still a risk. Another statistical thing that we do know is that in most people who are injured by guns are injured by their own guns when someone else takes their gun away from them. Let's see. Robin says, Tenebris, there's a reason for that. The guns they have come from states that don't restrict purchasing or gun shows. Yeah, that's true too. I was mentioning to the kids not long ago, we went to the Lego Brick Fest. It came to town, so we went, and it was pretty cool. But there was also a gun show at the same facility. It was the New York State Fairgrounds in Syracuse. And when the fair isn't in session, they rent out individual buildings for different events, and there happened to be a gun show at another building. And I said, it may not be a bad idea for me to go see if I can pick up a gun while we're here, because we're not at the point where I'm feeling particularly endangered yet, but internet people are getting a little wacky, and sometimes it worries me a bit. Kamikaze says it was very well handled. Great interview, Ember. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I was actually, I noticed that Secular Rarity, who you've seen from all across the internet, not only saw that, but reshared it on X, which, it's cool to have feedback from SR on anything, really. But also, like the share thing, I don't know. It's probably just a little thing, but as far as I know, that's the first time anything I've ever made has been shared on X. So it's a first on the calendar, a check mark we can put on. Jester Moon, hello from Calgary. Fantastic. We're building our Canadian audience. Now we've got Al and Jester, and sometimes Jess from How to Rule an Asteroid, and yeah, we're taking over Canada, one province at a time. Yeah, you can't have a discussion if you're just shouting at each other. That's absolutely true. Let's see. More info on gun shows. Gun shows are exactly the same. No background checks or dealer licenses. So I could get many guns. That would. I don't really want many guns. Kamikaze says Titan was talking about when new scientific discoveries are made, it doesn't always invalidate the previous knowledge. Yes. Yeah, like he was discussing himself. Newton's formulas are still used, even though the underlying principle that they're based on, that mass attracts mass, it turns out is mistaken. The fact that the formulas work makes them useful, and the fact that they're much simpler than Einstein's makes them a greater utility. So yeah, we do a similar thing. In fact, a lot of people don't realize that Newton was not the first person to come up with a previous theory of relativity. Newton didn't call his a theory of relativity, even though it functioned in a similar fashion. Galileo also wrote an earlier theory of relativity, and we still use that today for a number of things, including calculating parallax when we observe distant stars or a moving boat on an ocean, all sorts of things. Tenebris says, criminals don't obey the law. Unconstitutional gun laws only restrict law-abiding citizens. That's sort of what I meant about how we can't just adhere to a slogan. That's not always true. a lot of people who commit crimes only commit one crime. They're not out to break all the laws or get a high score for as many laws as possible. Or perhaps they're still in a situation where committing crime is necessary in order to like feed their family or something like that. But they're wary of certain laws because perhaps, for example, they're on probation and it's for a gun violation. So if they get caught with another gun, they automatically go to prison. But if they get caught with a pocket knife, then it's less severe. So there's a lot of different variations in the severity of offending. Not everybody who happens to be a criminal is going to run around and try to intentionally break every law they possibly can, as if getting the highest prison sentence was something like a high score. Robin says, Star Song, I need your address. You want a book on Kentucky Atheist? And there's Robin's email. So yeah, Star Song, if you're still, I think you're still around because you just commented a moment ago. But yeah, email Robin, get your book. I myself have a book from Joe's channel. I won one of Dave Warnock's books. It's right just out of reach over there. And yeah, good stuff. Let's see. Robin says, I know of no law-abiding citizens who have been prevented buying guns. That's a fair point, and something that often gets lost in the conversation. But we're so far off topic. I'm gonna drop a tangent in the chat. Tangents. It's an adventure. All right. Yeah, let's get back to it, shall we?
That solves that problem, okay? Unless you don't want that problem solved. You have the right to do that as a citizen in a democracy. You say, I don't want that. I don't think that's a problem. Let's not bring that to a law. That's the only point here. The law is to capture, to either support or deny something you want to put into effect as a law.
Okay,
then
we're in agreement.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
So the other question that I saw was the sort of application of this principle. So this has been used over the course of the 20th century, particularly to move the system of American government away from a legislative-led system of government toward a bureaucratic system of government, where an enormous amount of regulation and rulemaking is made by executive agencies, purportedly by experts. And one of the
I understand why Ben is mad about that, because he purports to be a small government guy. He's not, but he says he is, so he has to, bluster and make things about that. The thing of it is, a well-functioning bureaucracy is necessary to the operation of any empire this large in a civilizational state this complex. Every pistol permit can't go to Congress for an approval by vote of the full legislature. That just doesn't make any damn sense. You have to have officials who use the existing laws to determine actions, to make decisions, to approve or deny things, to make the wheels of government actually run. You have to have a bureaucracy. I get that Ben doesn't like that fact, but the governmental powers that be, the president, the legislature, the courts, they still have the ability to make, revise, and enforce or not laws, respectively. It doesn't change that. So he doesn't really have a leg to stand on here.
problems there is that a lot of these places become subject to regulatory capture. There's an evolution.
What is regulatory capture?
Regulatory capture means that you have lobbying groups, for example, that get a hold of the EPA and now are making it, and now the bureaucrats who are largely unassailable by the legislature and the executive doesn't pay attention to them.
So that sounds like it is.
That's not true at all. When a certain previous president came into office, he let go a lot of very important bureaucrats, some of whom he replaced with his own toadies, and they were incompetent at their job, and bad things happened. Some of them he just didn't replace at all, such as the pandemic response team. So, no, that's not true at all.
Things happening in the world that affect us all that are not derived from objectively researched.
Right. So I'm asking about the implementation of your principle on an actual particular level. Meaning, were you just talking in a utopian world, or is there a way to apply any of this sort of stuff?
That's a great question then. I didn't know where you were going to land on that. Right? Mm-hmm. So we have agencies that are entirely tasked with finding out what is objectively true. leading among them. And by the way, a lot of the cross tweets were saying, "Yeah, this is the Department of Truth," or whatever, in George Orwell
Right.
or
Ministry of Truth. Yes. And that's, if you've never read 1984, you absolutely should, because while it has spawned a number of conspiracy theories from people who aren't so good at critical thinking and understanding fiction, we know a few people who have trouble differentiating what's fiction and what's fact. One of them is sitting in that conversation. But there's a lot about what has been going on with the world over the last 100 years or more that is kind of important. And it's not just propaganda, although the propaganda is a big part of it. Understanding what's happening when people rename things. For example, the Ministry of Truth concerned with lies, the Ministry of Peace concerned with war, or in the real world, pretty much anything that ends with "for liberty" at the end of it should be a big red flag that they're for tyranny of a very specific kind that they think of as their own personal liberty. But I do digress. I see Granny is here. Hello, hello. Good to see you. Kamikaze said, SR is a great dude. He sure is. And if you ever want to tweak SR just a little bit, you get him on a rant. Ask him about the blacklist. Trust me, it'll be a fun time. Let's see. Shout out and Norman's Fish. Shootout out. I cannot read. English is hard. Says, I'm from Germany, and guys, sometimes I think it's crazy how many guys in the States have guns. Yeah, it's kind of terrifying. At least living here, it's kind of terrifying. There's a lot of reasons to be terrified living in the freest country in the world. Yeah. I saw so many body cam footage. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we started insisting police wear body cams, and why so many drivers have GoPros on their dashboards. It's crazy over here. Let's see. Anybody else while we're here? They know that guns are a threat to children. Yeah, that's a thing too. That's why there's a gun safes. Even the NRA teaches gun safety courses, for goodness sake. Even they are aware that guns are dangerous. Duh. Ryan, hello. Glad you could make it. Starsung says, I've read 1984. Many times I've seen laws being proposed that would implement some portion of that. Yeah. I'm thinking the wiretapping NSA authorization from George W.'s term comes to mind, for example. AJ's here. Hello. Good to see you. Ben Shapiro is not, wait for it, a good guy. And that's true. He's, there are a few people I've said fuck you to as often as Ben Shapiro. Heathen Granny says, I wish we can get some of the luxury that the people of Israel are enjoying with our tax dollars. Oof. That's a big oof. That is a big oof. Now, in fairness, I do know a person from Israel, and the regular people in Israel are not exactly enjoying luxury at the moment. But there's a lot to be said about how the tax dollars we're sending to support Israel's illegal war crimes, it's not a good situation. No, absolutely not.
or the
1984.
1984, or in Nazi Germany. Didn't they actually have a Bureau of Propaganda? Literally
Led
called
by
that?
Goebbels, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true, and technically not Godwin's law because it's not Nazis. It's the head honcho gets invoked. Then it's Godwin's law. But yeah, they had a propaganda bureau. The Soviets had a similar thing. They called it the Politburo, I believe. And we do too. We just don't call it the Ministry of Propaganda. So there's that. Booba Sweat says armed minorities are harder to oppress, and as a general rule, I tend to agree. We saw that with the Black Panthers. And in fact, I remember, I forget who it was who said it. I don't think it was Mandisa, It may have been Uncle Bobby, Gin and Truth, who's still working on getting his channel back last I heard, but you can see episodes from him on Peter's channel. Gonna go for it. I'm just referencing all the channels today. But whoever it was said that Martin Luther King shows what trying to be peaceful gets you. The Black Panthers show what trying to assert yourself can achieve. And so that's, again, I don't believe it's a good idea to use a slogan as a justification for an extreme position one way or the other, but it is valuable to have a more nuanced perspective, to see what all the different perspectives are saying, much like Niel was saying, to have an evidence-based, rational overall perspective. But maybe I'm a silly bean.
I think they even called it the proper. So the National Academy of Sciences, which was signed into law, created under the leadership of America's first Republican president. Who you know that is. Who's that?
America's first Republican president was Lincoln.
Lincoln, exactly. 1863, when he clearly had other things he needed to worry about. In 1863, there he signed the National Academy of Sciences because Europe was riding high economically, scientifically.
Yeah, and at that period, Europe had just gotten over the Napoleonic Wars. The Enlightenment was well underway. Modern science, as we consider it, was being forged, and people were starting to be liberated from the shackles of religious oppression. Now, that is a process that's still ongoing today. It's a very, very slow process. But from that point onward, people in Europe have become progressively more free over the years. Generally speaking, as Martin Luther King put it, the arc of human history bends towards justice, but it doesn't do it on its own. You have to push it, and it takes time. But yeah, Europe was starting to thrive and flourish. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., we decided to go have some religious revivals and not advance.
From an engineering point of view, they were fully exploiting the fruits of the Industrial Revolution, and they were kind of slowly working their way across the pond back here to the United States. He said, we have to get into that. So the National Academy of Sciences has one job, and that is to report on what is objectively true in the scientific fields in ways that can inform policy at the executive branch and in the legislative branch. That's their job. So when they come out with a report, they have reviewed all the evidence, and if they can't arrive at a conclusion, they'll tell you that. The evidence is inconclusive. Evidence is conclusive. This is where now you can.
National Academy of Sciences doing peer review before peer review was cool.
Do whatever you want with your policy because it's not rationalia. You still have lawmakers who are responsive to a constituency, to lobbyists and the like. But don't tell me you don't have the evidence there to base it on. And so you would enhance the importance and significance of a National Academy of Sciences so that you wouldn't have small groups with non-representative belief systems taking over the whole country's conduct.
So let's talk about the scientific process as it's currently carried out in the United States. One of the things that I'm afraid of, and I see it from the right on certain issues and from the left on certain issues, is a fear of actually investigating certain areas of science. So on the right, obviously, people typically cite climate change here and say, well, the right refuses to acknowledge that climate change is even happening, or at least large swaths of the right refuse to acknowledge that climate change is even happening. And
or anthropically
generated climate change.
It's nice of Niel to clarify and give Ben that out, but it is true. Ben is actually correct on this. There are large swaths of the right that refuse to admit climate change is happening. There's also large swaths, say that 5 times fast, of the right who are doing their damnedest to try to accelerate climate change because from their point of view, the faster you can speed up the end of the world, the sooner Jesus will come back and save us all. And that is not great. It's another thing that's kind of terrifying about what's going on in the United States these days. Purple, hello, good to see you. Glad you could make it. I see Robin asking for references about this. Biden just expanded government surveillance to allow them to get information from anyone's online service provider without needing a warrant. Yeah, I'd want a citation on that one myself. But that said, that may not be as much of an overreach as it seems from the headlines, because the government can already do that. They can ask, and most ISPs, telephone providers, others, will simply hand over the information without a warrant. If the government asks, they just hand it over. That Apple got into trouble over that a few years ago because a person was arrested, and the arresting agency had their phone, but it had biometric unlock, and so they couldn't get into the person's phone to try to obtain evidence. So they went to Apple, and Apple went, screw you. And the government got big mad. But for the most part, when the government asks, the information just gets handed over. If they say no, then the government has to go get a warrant. If that's true, now they just have to go get a warrant. But the point is that they've been able to do it most of the time anyway, because the big corporations don't push back at all. Defending your rights is not their problem, and so they don't. And it's a big fucking oof. Let's see. Robin says, government's job is to protect citizens, not restrain them. I tend to agree. That's one area where I'm very, very conservative. The government should protect the citizens and get the hell out of their way. That said, sometimes restraining citizens is necessary to protect the other citizens. That's why most of our laws are based on the concept that, as Owen Morgan puts it, you can swing your fist any which way you like, but your right to swing that fist ends at the tip of my nose. And yeah, a lot of things are based on that. The only principled restraints on freedom are when they start to impact other people's freedom and well-being. And I think that's a really good place to put the line most of the time. Let's see. Starsong says, they completely ignore that verse in Revelation that says God will destroy those who destroy the earth. Shock. They haven't read their Bible. I don't know how to take that. But also, book said a thing. Hooray. Let's see. Do they really want their God to return when they will be on his hit list? I mean, do they really want a God who's obsessed with crucifixes to be mad at them? That seems a bad idea. I don't know. Tree says, goddamn, everyone is live right now. It happens. I originally picked this time slot because nobody was on. There was all the various atheist shows were earlier in the day. I think it's Talk Heathen and then Atheist Experience on the ACA shows. The Sunday show over on the line, and then everybody was done. And so I would do my show now because that was it. Then I learned Skeptic Haven exists, and I believe their call-in show happens during this time slot. But yeah, that's why I picked this time. But now everybody in the universe is live this time. Such predicaments, we must forge ahead. Shootout Out says, Ember, what's your opinion on how much religion influences laws in the states? Because if someone is talking through to God, it's getting dangerous. Yeah, it depends on the state, but some of them are very transparently basing new laws on whatever their religion of choice happens to be. And that's unconstitutional. But they're still doing it because one of the weird quirks about the way the laws work here in the U.S. is that you can pass a law that you know is illegal because it will still go into force until and unless someone ponies up the dough, hires the legal team, and works their way through the courts to challenge it and have it struck down. So you can put an illegal law in place and it will still have power for, a couple of years perhaps before it finally gets knocked down by the courts. And the people who are doing things the incorrect way know that and are taking advantage of it because by the time the law gets struck down, it won't be their problem anymore, or because the law's been in force, they'll now have the political will to pass a constitutional amendment to make the law now constitutional or something. There's so many instances like that, and it's absolutely horrible. Bree, hello. Glad you could make it. Good to see you. I hope your computer is feeling better. Let's see. And Trees buzzes back for sure. And let's see. Rights should not vary by state, and the government should not be allowed to restrict evidence-based healthcare. You know, I was actually working on this today too. I told Beck that I'd been doing a lot of things, and I've been doing a lot of things. And it turns out that in 24 states, plus the District of Columbia, healthcare cannot be restricted based on the various protected characteristics of Title IX, Title VII. There's a couple other sections. I looked up so much shit today. But TLDR is in many states and also at the federal level for other circumstances, evidence-based healthcare cannot be restricted, even though in some states it is being restricted illegally, which goes back to what I was just saying about how you can pass a law that itself is illegal because someone has to challenge it before it gets struck down, and it has to work its way through the courts before it gets struck down, and it's very disheartening. Kamikaze says, did you do a premiere yesterday right as you were going to go live with Mark? Yes, I did my weekly premiere. I've been moving it around to different time slots to see where it could do the most good. Some weeks I will do it early in the morning so that I can redirect over to Breeze Live from the Hive. Sometimes when I can't do a Sunday show, I'll put the premiere Sunday afternoon so that there's something that's redirecting to Bad Science Sunday with Maya. And various things like this. Because I knew I'd be doing a live show this weekend, and Live from the Hive got canceled because Bree was having computer issues, I decided, and the debate review is on Mark's channel, why not use it as a redirect over to Mark's channel for the debate review? And I think it worked pretty well. It's not my highest viewed video ever, but it did do the redirect thing, and it's not the lowest viewed video ever either. So, I don't know. But yeah, I'm always experimenting with when videos go up. Most of it is my schedule, like lives. I can only do them when I'm here in my home studio kind of thing. But I'm always tinkering and experimenting. I'll do different thumbnails. I'll do different titling conventions. I'll do different subject matter to try to see what actually works. So far, I don't have any consistent results, but I've only been at this for a year and a half. So, check back with me in, 10 or 20 years, and I'll maybe be able to tell you how the heck YouTube works in 2024. Oh, let's see. Top Tester says, I've called law enforcement for help twice in my life. They didn't show up either time. Other than that, my experience with the state has been being caged for nonviolent drug offenses. Oof. Yeah, that's some bullshit. That kind of crap needs to change. Let's see. All right, there's a bunch more individual comments, some of which I don't even know exactly what they're pertaining to, like citation needed. I say that a lot myself. Citation needed. Hey, I did set it up properly. That's cool. But yeah, so we'll get back to it for now, and I'll try to check in with the chat another time or two before it's time to go over to Maya's.
Climate change, yeah. So most radicals will say it's not even happening at all, that this is just part of a general warming trend, or that it has stopped, or any of that. But why don't we start with that, and then we'll get to sort of areas on the left where science has been politicized, or where maybe inquiry has been limited, or attempted to be limited. So on the climate change issue,
or hijacked.
Yeah. So let's talk about the climate change issue for a second. So what do we know and what is uncertain? Because this seems to be there are, it seems to me, gray areas, but the gray areas are baked into the science, meaning that according to the IPCC report, the climate could warm anywhere from 2 degrees Celsius to 6 degrees Celsius over the course of the next century or so. We're still not sure exactly of the level of climate sensitivity to human activity. You can acknowledge that human activity is responsible for the majority to the vast majority of climate change that has happened on Earth for the past century or so.
Yeah, industrial age. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But what is the range of outcomes? And does that suggest that if you have a different point of view on the solutions, that this amounts to climate denial? That's the part that I start to get dicey about.
Yeah, so
It's interesting how Ben talks very, very fast when he's running down obvious stuff everyone would agree with. But then when he gets to positing his own point, he slows down and thinks about what he's saying as he's saying it. I don't know. It just strikes me as weird that it's like really obvious when he's doing that, because he's rearranging word structure and sentence diagrams in his head to try to make it the the most direct point without actually admitting anything. He wants you to agree with him, but he doesn't want to be taken out of context in such a way that it might be perceived that he's agreeing with you.
I mean, professionally, I'm an astrophysicist, not a climate scientist,
Right.
but I do read. And
Right, and you've talked about this
And I
before.
do recognize when a scientific consensus emerges, and I want to make it clear what I mean by the word consensus. A scientific consensus is one, it's not where everyone gets in a room and says, hey, let's vote. That's not how truth is established. It's established by looking at peer-reviewed research and asking, in what direction is that taking us? What is it saying? And not any one research paper has all answers in it. They're like pieces of answers. And I looked at this ice core in this section of Greenland. Well, I looked at an ice core in Antarctica going back 100,000 years. Well, I looked at the migration patterns of this insect. And you start piecing together the biology, the chemistry, the geology, the atmospheric science, and it's all pointing in the same direction. When that happens, it's time to sit up and take notice. What the hell is going on? Okay?
Niel paints a different picture of consensus than I would go with. We've done surveys, we've done studies, we've done investigations, and we found that roughly 97% of all climate scientists agree that global warming is real, that it's anthropogenic, that it's getting really out of hand. And in fact, we even have data on exactly how much warmer the globe is on average. It's a consensus. But Niel's taking it a different direction that I appreciate the nuance of, that we're looking at all these many varied different data points, the geology, the oceanography, the atmospheric sciences, and many, many different facets of things, and saying all of these are indicating the same thing is happening. So maybe we should pay attention to this thing that is definitely happening.
And when we speak of a climate consensus, what we're saying is that the overwhelming majority of the scientific community has produced research evidence citing that humans are responsible for climate changing in this world, leading to the warming of temperatures in the atmosphere. Period. If you want to deny that, you are denying it because it conflicts with your cultural or political principles. Okay, it's a free country. Go ahead and do so. But if you now rise to power over legislation, that's dangerous. It's irresponsible and dangerous. So the challenge...
He's only touching on it, but it's important. What is dangerous when you are a policymaker? I mean, there's things that are obviously dangerous, like launching nuclear weapons, but also being irresponsible, because while you might get shunned or voted out of office or possibly put on trial in The Hague, any decision you make is going to impact a lot of people's lives. And as we saw with the previous president, certain decisions can cost a lot of lives. And so it's kind of important to be responsible, because being irresponsible not only causes harm, but is oftentimes more dangerous than doing things that are intentionally harmful.
are modeling climate. Oh my gosh. It's like there's the heating of the oceans from the sun, and then the oceans keep some of the heat, and they trap it and put it low. So then when the atmosphere cools, the ocean releases some of that heat back, and then the trees and the ice caps reflect sunlight back. But if they shrink, then there's more. So there's
a lot of
there's
variables,
100 stuff. So that's why there's variance in the predictions that come from it. But the predictions all point in the same general direction. You will never have 100% of all scientists agreeing. That's not how progress in science works.
Here's a thing that I actually do approve of in the way Israel makes decisions. And it may be a Jewish culture thing rather than an Israeli state thing, but it's a very useful thing. Especially when you're in a situation where people are going, oh, well, get on board with the consensus. And it's kind of contrarian, which may be why I like it so much, but it also seems like a reasonable precaution. If 9 people in a room all agree on the same thing, it becomes the 10th person's duty to try to show that they're wrong. Because that's how you prevent this kind of echo chamber thinking that we see predominantly in the right, but in many political circles, in many government circles, like the UK Parliament as it pertains to trans healthcare at the moment. They're all assuring each other how right they are because there's nobody in there filling that 10th person role. It seems like even when it's not necessary at all, simply having it there as a precaution makes every decision that gets made more sound.
What you're looking for is the overwhelming. If only half the scientific papers showed this and the other half didn't, you got no result.
I guess the question that I have about climate change, and at least its public-facing sort of presentation, is the level of uncertainty when it comes to its effects. So you can acknowledge that climate change is happening. There are people who talk about catastrophic climate change, millions of migrants suddenly running around the world, Miami underwater.
Yeah.
We're all dead within a century and a half. So a certain catastrophic
That won't happen.
level.
We will not all be dead in a century and a half.
No, and
we'll just flood all our coastlines.
Well, and by flooding all our coastlines, it's not going to be immediate. You mean that there will be
Correct.
a gradual increase in sea level,
However,
which can be mitigated in certain ways, presumably.
I'm reminded of the H-Bomber guy video where Ben was saying, oh, well, you know, if the coastline moves, you just sell your property and move inland to the new coastline. Sell it to who, Ben? Aquaman? Oh, my goodness. There's only so much we can do for mitigation, right? Like the Netherlands has a gigantic dike to hold back the ocean so that they don't lose a huge chunk of their land. Are we going to build gigantic dikes around every continent? That seems impractical. So maybe we should, not cause the problem in the first place. I don't know.
However, consider that most of the world's most important cities are on the water's edge, historically for transportation, for commerce, and the like. The most important cities in the world are on the water. Okay. Most of the most important cities in the world are found in that way. All right. So it's not like the water level start to rise. You might, if you're following my tweets, I said if we lose the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheet, then all that water goes back into the ocean. The ocean levels will rise. It'll rise to the level of the Statue of Liberty's left elbow.
Yeah, what are the chances that the entire Greenland ice sheet or the entire Antarctic ice sheet?
What are the chances? No, that sounds like exaggeration. It is not. The amount of ice on just the western Antarctic ice sheet, the amount of water it would displace if it ever came up off of the ground, because it's below sea level now. It's holding. If it ever started to displace water, that would be a 6-meter rise in sea level. 6 meters. The average human is something like 1.5 meters tall. So it's not good. The eastern Antarctic ice sheet, 30 meters. And that's just Antarctica. Like, that's potentially civilization ending level flooding, because we would lose virtually all of our technological infrastructure. And I mean virtually all of it. We'd lose all our seaports, most of our highways, many of our factories, what few remain here in the Western Hemisphere, and the consequences on the climate in the areas that do remain above the new, much higher ocean would be incalculable. You think we've seen droughts now, or intense storms now? Holy crap!
The limiting case. It's the limiting.
Well, if an asteroid were to hit the Earth, we'd all be dead. But
yes, no, but it's if you want to ask how bad could it get, that's how bad could get. And just to,
to
get her elbows straight, she's holding the Declaration of Independence in her left. It's that elbow, not this elbow.
Not the one,
okay. So
if you're between them,
we're
you're
fine.
But I guess
the elbow straight.
So I mean, but this is one of the areas where I feel like, okay, so why are we talking about the limiting case as opposed to most likely case, or the cases that are most likely to fall within the range of possibility? And is that sort of alarmism generative of bad things?
Alarmism. Fuck you, Ben. I'm gonna do. Fuck you, Ben. What Ben is distracting from right now is the conservative principle, which is if you distract from a problem by saying, "Well, are we sure it's a problem? Do we have enough research? Maybe we should keep doing more research." You're not talking about solving the problem. Like, why would we put measures in place to prevent this catastrophe from happening when we can just study more whether it actually exists? It's a distraction. It's the same thing they do with wedge issues. Except with wedge issues, it's fucking up actual people's lives, so we can't ignore them, even though people like Ben don't actually care how it works out, because to them it's just a distraction.
Thinking about possible solutions, meaning that
during the dinosaurs, during periods of when the dinosaurs roamed, there was no ice on Earth. And so there was much less land. When you enter an ice age, water evaporates from the oceans. It goes up to clouds. The clouds move over land. It snows. But it's so cold, the snow never melts. It just stays there. And this just keeps happening. So you're systematically draining the ocean. And you're building snow layers on the ground, on land masses. These are glaciers. Glaciers are slow-moving, and they're very, they'll slowly go back to the ocean, but slower than the rate at which the oceans are being drained. That's what revealed the Bering Strait land bridge to our nomadic ancestors. Said, hey, let's keep walking. They just keep walking. It's just land. Let's keep walking. And they walk into North America.
Well, okay, so as Niel said, he's an astrophysicist, so a lot of these things aren't actually in his purview. He is a very smart man, but he's not right about everything all the time. For one thing, we don't know that there ever was a Bering Land Bridge. It seems likely that, first of all, we know that people on the Pacific coast were capable of building ships that could travel hundreds, even thousands of miles across the ocean. The Pacific Islanders exist. We know that that was a thing they could do. So you don't even need the land bridge to get people over to North America, even in large numbers. But also, during the last ice age, we don't know that the sea level went down enough that there was a land bridge where the Bering Sea is now. But also, the more glaciers you have, the further south they come. At a certain point, you cover the entire Bering Strait with glacier. It's all ice cap. And so you don't need a land bridge if you've got an ice cap to walk across. But details.
The ice age ends, it melts, the water levels rise, the land bridge is broken, and never the twain would meet for tens of thousands of years, stranding an entire branch of the human species in North and South America. By the way, which is why the Columbus voyage was, in my read of history, the single most important thing that ever happened in civilization. Now, if it wasn't him, it would have been someone else, but it happened to be him. He reconnected these two separate branches of the human species that had been separated for tens of thousands of years. That's a profound fact for me.
Well, you can tell Niel was educated in the United States, where we make a big fucking deal out of certain European explorers. But of course, we know that various seagoing civilizations of Europe have been in touch with the people on the North American continent for hundreds of years before that. We know the Vikings were able to cross the Atlantic, and it's highly likely that many other civilizations were as well. There's archaeological evidence that very strongly indicates Chinese sailors were able to reach the Western Hemisphere hundreds of years before Columbus. And but details.
So it's already been the case that the Earth had no ice, had a lot of ice.
Right.
So this is not like And we've already been hit by an asteroid. So
Right.
you could say, oh, asteroid, that's right. Tell that to the dinosaurs, right? The dead dinosaurs who didn't have a space program or opposable thumbs. You need both. So the issue is not that the water level will rise and you can just walk away from it. It rises this much, and the next storm surge, combined with a high tide, which you almost always get with a hurricane, because it takes a long time for a hurricane to move up the coast. It takes typically a couple of weeks. Somewhere in there's going to be full moon or new moon high tide with a storm surge. Suppose you're
You don't need a full moon or a new moon to get a high tide. High tides happen twice a day, every day, because the Earth is spinning under the moon as well as the moon going around the Earth. I know any sailors who might watch this in the future, hello future people, subscribe if you haven't, would absolutely lose their shit over that statement.
your jetties or levees or whatever it is that keeps your city safe from the water that's out right there in the river or in the bay or in the ocean, whatever that height is what you decided would be what would protect the city.
Right.
The ocean goes up an inch. That's all it takes. 1 inch to breach your levees. If you breach it by 1 inch, your city is now connected to a semi-infinite amount of water for as long as that hurricane is sitting there. And the water just pours in. That's what happened here in Hurricane Sandy.
Katrina
Okay.
also breached all the levees.
Yeah, well,
The levees broke there.
Well, levees
but yeah.
broke. Don't get me started. That was like an engineering. I mean, Katrina was Category 3. It already passed through New Orleans. People were like sweeping up the branches. Okay, we survived that. Then the levees broke. Okay, so the broken levees flooded New Orleans, not Katrina. We keep blaming Katrina without putting the lens back on our own maintenance of our infrastructure and our and
Well, there wouldn't have been so much water around without a hurricane causing the levees to rupture. Yes, there's plenty of blame to go around, but it's not like it would have happened if there hadn't been a storm. Hello, Pinworm. Good to see you. A ton of evidence of early contact is underwater, too. We may never know who and when. Yeah, like we were discussing earlier. We have to constantly be cognizant of the fact that there is always going to be evidence that we don't have or we can't detect. But we are finding new interesting stuff all the time. I got a news alert just a few days ago about a new settlement that was discovered off the Pacific Northwest coast that's something like 50 meters underwater, because that's where the shoreline was at the time that settlement was built. And so sometimes we do find these things, and we learn a lot from these long-lost civilizations, if you will.
anticipation of what could happen given certain forces of nature. My point is, you're going to flood your city not because the water will slowly rise. You're going to flood your city because the storm that has the benefit of that extra inch, plus a storm surge, plus a higher intensity of the storm, because if the atmosphere is warmer, it carries more moisture. There's more heat driving the intensity of storms. You'll breach that, you'll flood the city. And there you have it. Or you lose your beach house. It happens in those storms. That's your first indication that your coastline is at risk. And not to mention those countries, island countries in the South Pacific, where the average elevation is a few feet above sea level. So you talked about refugees. You know who knows about global warming and who's preparing for it? Insurance companies and the military. The military cares, our military cares about where there is unrest in the world. Where if people are displaced, that creates problems because they got to go somewhere, and the borders are closed. Well, unless
I mean, Niel's getting off into rampant speculation, but he's not wrong. Many insurance companies are preparing for greater storm damage, more floods, so on and so forth. It seems wise to prepare for something that every scientist says is coming and the government's not doing anything about. As for the military, yes and no. That's partly an intelligence kind of thing. Like, it's not like the average soldier is practicing South Pacific languages in preparation for a flood of immigrants on boats that no, that's not how that works. But the intelligence community is certainly watching for possible disruptions. But on the subject of altitude on islands, yeah, going back to the 6 meter sea level rise, the best case scenario with the rate global warming is going right now. Yeah, we'd lose a lot of islands. We'd lose 3 of Japan's islands. It's and Florida, the highest point in Florida is what, 2 meters above sea level? I exaggerate, but not by much. Florida is a remarkably flat state. It's oof.
You're near a nice country, right? So yeah, it affects more than just your beach house.
No, for sure. I mean, the question becomes whether mitigation is the chief method of fighting this, or adaptation is the chief method of fighting this, or geoengineering. Should we be building more levees?
I
building
love
levees higher?
geoengineering.
I mean, I'm a fan. I like technology. Technology is helpful.
It's in its infancy, geoengineering. But for me, one pie in the sky thought I have is hurricanes coming and ready to destroy a city. You put in some big anemometer inside the hurricane, right? And it spins the anemometer. But the anemometer is itself a turbine, right? So it's sucking energy from the cyclonic motion of the hurricane, and you use that to drive the energy needs of the city that it might otherwise destroy.
You should propose that to President Trump. I mean, he's going to nuke a hurricane. This sounds better than that. So that's it. So moving on.
I appreciate Ben making fun of the dumbass 91 felonies president who was previously in charge. Yeah, nuking a hurricane is fucking stupid, because even if it had any effect, it would add heat to the system, which would make it that much stronger, and also fill it with fallout. It's not just a stupid idea; it's a horribly bad idea. But that's neither here nor there. But Niel raises an interesting point. As there is no such thing as a free lunch, particularly when it comes to energy. The big wind turbines that we're building all over the globe, they don't have no effect. They're taking kinetic energy from the atmosphere. They're slowing down wind speed very, very slightly, because the surface area compared to the whole of the atmosphere is very tiny. But they are taking energy from the atmosphere. And we're building hundreds of thousands of these things. Is it enough to stop a hurricane? Probably not. But if you put a lot of them in the path of a hurricane, it could rob some of the wind speed. It wouldn't stop a storm, but it could mellow it out a little bit.
From climate change, which is an area, as I said, where some people on the right are not particularly interested, to areas where it seems like the left is militating against the advent of science. One of those areas is the area of transgenderism, where the
Oh, for fuck's sake, Ben.
Seriously, there's no I have no transgender letters.
It's true. It's true.
It was just
nothing in the book.
Yeah,
I know.
no
We've strayed now far from the topic of your book, but since I have you here and you're a science person who knows science, I'm going to ask you to science for me a little bit.
Sure.
But when it comes to transgenderism, the argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument.
False. Gender is different from sex, but the two concepts are in conversation with each other. Also, this is your unfortunately regular periodic reminder that transgenderism is not a thing. It's a word that people like Ben use to dehumanize the concept, so he's not saying we should wipe out transgender people, just transgenderism, as if there was a way to do that without also wiping out the people.
Made that it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage biological women. And this seems to me...
All women are biological. I mean, I'm not a cyborg. Details, though. No, it's this common sense nonsense is nonsense. And I didn't expect this in this interview. I can only pre-watch so much of a thing and edit so much of the thing, etc. It's a weird tangent away from what Niel's actually there to talk about Ben's pet issues that he's completely and demonstrably wrong on. But since he brings it up, I will point out yet again that for a very long time, we didn't have any actual reason to believe that trans women are stronger than cis women. It's just a gut feeling, intuition, suspicion kind of thing. But now we have data. The IOC, I believe, came out with a study showing that trans women who have been transitioning for, I believe, 2 years or more are actually at a disadvantage compared to cis women. But Ben's not going to talk about that because it's catastrophic to his argument.
Absolutely ascientific. That if we're actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defects.
I'm happy to opine on this.
I'm sure Niel is happy to opine on this. Absolutely. But everything Ben said there is wrong. Just to point it out, there is not and never has been a sex binary. As you know what, I have the clip. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, here we go.
This is the really important thing to remember, is that there are lots of ways that we define sex. The most common is gamete size, but that's not the only way. And not a single way that we define sex has only 2 exclusive options.
There we go. Forrest Valkai, actual evolutionary biologist. This came up in yesterday's video, but that's why I made a clip of it, because it needs repeating so very often. And yeah, Ben is just completely wrong on all of the points. I could do an entire video breaking just that apart, but that's not what we're here for.
This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender. Otherwise, why do you even give a shit what someone identifies with? We live in a free country, and with consenting adults and people free expression of who and what they are.
Man, on adult level, I agree with you. I think it does matter what you teach your children.
That's what I'm saying. And so there's the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all.
And it certainly shouldn't be any of the government's business, as they were talking about earlier. Passing policy based on a person's own religious beliefs or gut feelings or whatever. No, that's not how things should be done. But I really appreciate Niel's pushback against Ben. Who gives a shit? Like, Ben, you don't care about women's sports. Why are you inserting yourself? Except to be a dick to a marginalized group.
Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay?
Well,
this is for their own freedoms, because we live in a free country. Now, what is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved. And I've followed that closely, and I don't see any meaningful solutions to come down off of that. We know that hormones manifest differently in different people, and there's the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue advantage. So, I've tried to think of what the future of sports would be in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may be, you don't specify whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your hormones. This is thought I had. I don't know. I don't know.
And even though he's off the top of his heading, it's not far off from how things actually work. There have been cis women who weren't allowed to compete with women because their hormone levels were off. Stephanie Helms goes into much greater detail on this sort of thing on a couple of streams over on her channel, Stephicath. Another channel reference for you. We're racking them up today. But yeah, TLDR, that's what happens now. And people, even cis people, get disqualified because their hormone levels aren't within range.
Where it's going to land.
The WNBA won't be in business for very long if that's the case.
It would just be, you'd have to.
It's so funny he mentions the WNBA, since he went on to be part of the creation of Lady Ballers, the Daily Wire's comedy movie about not trans women competing in women's sports, which they had to make the way they did because when they tried to send people to go join women's sports and being stronger men and faster, whatever, they would just naturally dominate. They couldn't do it because they weren't good enough. The bigger, faster, stronger men couldn't compete with the professional athlete women on the WNBA. And also, they weren't willing to transition for the sake of the film. But I do have to wonder, and I've posited this more than once, but it bears repeating. If it were true that trans women are faster, stronger, more manly, and all of that crap, why aren't they winning every single award ever? Why is there ever a cis woman winning in women's sports? Why isn't every team on every sport composed entirely of cis women? Maybe because that's not what's actually true.
You'd have to find some way to compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
I guess the area where it does come up in a non-sports area.
Yeah, tell me, 'cause I don't know.
So it would be, you talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right
Yes.
now, children are being taught about the quote-unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory-based idea.
No.
Ben misunderstands what a theory is. Yes, it is scientifically based. It's how things actually are. As we've mentioned before in other videos, but every video is somebody's first video, so I'll cover it briefly here. You can say there's binary categories, but if you have a single result that doesn't meet one of those two data points, it's not a binary. The fact intersex people exist means it is not a binary. It is at best a trinary, but even that's not true because we're using an illusion of perspective to try to claim that these points are points when in fact they are themselves spectra. Like the data of what falls under Ben's definition of manliness is a range. You've got everything from the Paul Bunyan lumberjack types all the way through the metrosexual people who could pass as women without HRT. They're all men, according to Ben. So there is a spectrum that is what he's pretending is a data point of man. And then for women, you have a similar spectrum of traits and characteristics of womanliness and such. So they're both spectra. And they overlap. So the whole thing is a spectrum. I don't know what Ben thinks he's talking about here.
Wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
That's a social point,
sure.
not a scientific point.
It's
Meaning we express ourselves
hold on.
based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined. But it is a real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
So
the question is what?
Well, it's not really a matter of how one wants to identify. It's whether one wants to be honest about who they are or not. Ben may put on airs and pose about his true nature, but most of us, we can't live that way, not long term. We have to be who we are. We can't be anyone other than who we are. But also, since it comes up, among many other resources, I try to keep various resources up to date over on betterthanreligion.com. Plug for my website, also in the description. But I do have this handy-dandy chart, a gender spectrum flow chart kind of thing. And it runs through the different levels and characteristics of how identity works and characterization. Ben's trying to hold the line at identity, and he's trying to indicate that it's voluntaristic, like you opt in rather than just describe who you are. But in fact, the gender spectrum runs all the way back to biology, and it isn't just intersex people who make it a spectrum. What it means to be male and what it means to be female are also a bimodal distribution. That's up there on the website, free for anyone to look at, use, reference, etc. I just thought I'd point it out because when this kind of nonsense comes up, it's kind of useful, at least for me. And maybe we'll get deeper into it if Ben continues his nonsense. Also, hello to everyone who has joined since the last time I said hello. I see AR, hello, good to see you. Von Rek, always welcome. Wrestling and other sports are often segregated by weight as well. An excellent point. We don't just do it by gender. And also, the reason we segregate by gender isn't so women can have a chance to play because men are so much stronger. Women need to be protected from the big, strong men. This is some bullshit that always gets pulled. A, the assumption that trans women aren't women, and B, that women suck at sports. It's not just transphobic, it's misogynistic as hell. But the reason that many sports are segregated by gender is because the women were beating the men. And this very sensitive, ego-fragile men couldn't handle that. So women had to be put in their own category, so it wasn't possible for women to beat the men. The same reason we had racially segregated leagues back in the day. Because if black people were beating white people, what did that do for the superiority of white people? Which is why it was a major, major social issue when we tried to integrate sports. We finally did. And now we see not every sports team is made exclusively of black people. It's just a fairer competition. Everybody's on the same field. C'est la vie. We could do the same thing with gender, but we have an even stronger than the racism in this country is the patriarchal thinking. There's that underlying current that permeates not just the right, but across the center and even some of the left, this misogynistic idea that women are inferior. And it's just not true. But it still influences policy on every level. That's a damn shame. Yes, comedy movie, you mean propaganda. Yeah, it's an oof. UC Love, good to see you. It is completely bimodal and changes over your lifetime. Yeah, that's true too. The older you get, the more in the middle of the mode you wind up. It's yeah, the fact that Ben is constantly saying facts don't care about your feelings, but then presents his feelings and doesn't reference the facts. It's terribly funny. Kamikaze gifting 5 Emberships. Thank you so much. I did not see that until just now. Those went to Fiona, Sydney Raptor, Andrew Christofferson, Mage Greywolf, and unapologetically Chrissy. Congratulations, everybody. Do enjoy your custom emojis and all the other assorted perks that come with membership. Embership membership. There's a lot of them. I don't know them all off the top of my head, even though I created them. I did that over a year ago. But they do include early and ad-free access to new videos. For instance, the next video that'll come out in roughly 2 weeks is already available to members. So, yeah, there's that. All kinds of goodies over there. All right, let's see if we can wrap this up before it's time to go over to Maya's.
Is the relationship of that to biology, meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But
he's conflating logic with tangible reality. He's just conflating all kinds of shit. Yeah, trans women are women, the same way tall women are women, and short women are women, and tan women are women, and redheaded women are women. You can put any descriptor you want in front of women, and you're still talking about women. So from a purely logical A equals A perspective, trans women are women. They're not identical to women. They're a category of women. What Ben's failing to say is trans women are identical to cis women. And no one is saying that because that's what those descriptors mean. Trans is different from cis. That is the nature of those words. That's why they're there.
people don't seem to want to say that. although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going with this? What are you trying to accomplish by asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like, why is it bad or wrong?
Well, if you were saying things that were just true, that would be a great start, Ben, but you're not, and you know you're not, because you're a propaganda person, and you've been told this over and over. That's not factually true.
I have another way to approach this. I care what is objectively true in the world as a scientist. But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only sociological, then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about society that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say, it's not biological, it's just your this, it's real and it's there.
Well,
because it's real because it manifests.
But it is real because it manifests. But the question of how to classify manifestation is a scientific question, meaning that, for example, there was a woman over at Brown University. She came out with a study that suggested that there was a phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria, in which
that would be Lisa Littman, who is no longer with Brown University. She is a disgraced former researcher whose paper's been retracted. And if Ben cared about facts, he would know that.
A member of a particular group would suffer from gender dysphoria, and this person's immediate peer group would suddenly have an onset of gender dysphoria. This paper was so controversial that Brown tried to pull it, and then was forced to reassign it later. You see this sort of
That's a
treatment
different question. What you're asking now is, are there some topics that should not be studied scientifically?
Right.
And is there some taboo? And Sam Harris speaks a lot about this.
Yes.
And I think the concern is, if you study some topic that's a hot button topic and you bring scientific methods and tools to it, we don't trust, I'm interpreting here, I think we as a society don't trust that people in charge in a free country won't try to legislate something that will constrict people's freedoms in the face of that information. I think that's the fear.
Well, isn't that...
It's a fear.
I mean, and isn't that...
We don't trust our own ability to govern ourselves in the face of what could be some information relative to other kinds of information.
Isn't that a bit of a problem?
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. People who are terrified of the truth because it's crippling to their prejudiced beliefs. People who aren't willing to say, maybe I was wrong, and are willing to fuck up the laws of an entire country in order to pretend that they were never shown to be wrong. It's not just laughably absurd, it's fucking harmful. That's why channels like the Transpositions are so necessary. If people like Ben didn't make asinine points like Ben is making, we wouldn't need to do that channel, because trans people would just be another kind of channel.
Yeah, it means it's not a free society. It's not a society of free inquiry, which I think you need ultimately. But yeah.
My general take on all of this stuff, from climate change to gender dysphoria to all of these issues, is bring out the science and then let's hash it out. I think that the problem I'm seeing on a lot of sides is...
What is your motivation?
Why? Why does that matter?
It matters because if you have political power, you could end up creating legislation that subtracts freedoms from people who previously were enjoying the same freedoms as you. The history of that exercise
then make a better argument.
Doesn't end well.
Well, but the history of which exercise? Bring out all the science and let's hash it out?
I'm saying if you bring out all the science and the politicians hash it out, the history of that exercise is a recipe for disaster if it involves discoveries that put people's freedom as defined in our Constitution at risk.
But now you're arguing for limitations on areas of particular study.
No, I'm arguing on we need a way to shield, we need a way to protect people's freedoms in the face of whatever gets discovered scientifically.
So
I'll give you.
I agree. I think that's what the Constitution is for, is to guard rights from.
But we're always fighting people who want rights are always fighting others who are saying they don't get the rights from the Constitution. This is a daily challenge on the progressive left. It is a daily challenge, right? Here's an example. I forgot how I ended up getting this phone call.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm a little bit distracted. Not important. Yeah, you, as we've mentioned many times elsewhere, here and on other channels, trans people have had rights to be on sports teams, to use the proper bathroom that they correctly fit into. And now what's being talked about is limiting those rights, retracting those rights, and that's a reactionary thing. As we've said before, we do have the evidence. Ben is choosing not to learn about it because it's the opposite of what he prefers to believe, and it hurts other people's rights. He's motivated, and it's not a motive to find truth, despite what he may cry about.
It was some magazine that serves the gay community. And they want, I remember why, because they wanted my opinion on, they wanted my opinion about whether being gay was biological or mental.
Right, there's that new study that came out, this vast study.
Or psychological.
Right,
okay?
Right.
And I said, I don't care which it is. Find out what it is, fine. But the answer to that question should have no consequence on legislations or laws. Because, for example, suppose it said it's purely biological, okay? Then you say, oh, that explains it. Suppose it says it's purely psychological. What are you going to do now? You say, well, now you're going to go to the reorientation camps or whatever those are called, where they realign you because they say it's psychological rather than biological.
Yeah, the conversion therapy thing. Oh my goodness, that's been resurfacing lately. As anybody who already is subscribed to the Transpositions is aware, we've been following Dr. Cass since the infamous review of hers came out. And she's done multiple interviews where she said, oh, well, conversion therapy is not really a bad thing, actually. Freaking oof.
All of a sudden, people start behaving in ways in society that want to constrict the freedom of expression of who and what people are. And that is a danger. So maybe there needs to be a line in the sand. Let science do what it does, but politicians keep us free. Yet there's so many politicians that are doing the opposite of that.
So why aren't you a libertarian?
And that scares me.
I'm a libertarian. Come over here. Just
okay.
The line is right here. Just join me over here.
Here I go. Come in. I've read a lot about libertarianism. There's some fascinating strong points within it, but I would say that I have too much of me wants to help others to possibly cross over the line to libertarians. Libertarians, I got mine. You get yours. That's your problem. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but.
He's not far off, though. That's kind of one of the problems with libertarian perspective. Is it's too self-centered for me. I'm one of those narcissistic trans people who cares about their own appearance and wants to have a happy life. How dare? And I can't do libertarianism. I care about other people too much. It's a flaw, I suppose. Oh, I distracted a little bit in the side chat. Yeah, Bree, I should have given you a wrench earlier because you need to be able to post links to your own show, to Transpositions episodes, to other relevant things like data. So yeah, and also it's good to have more mods around, so on and so forth. But yeah, on the subject of Leah Thomas, yeah, she was not dominating anything. She was not an awful swimmer before her transition, and she was not a particularly great swimmer once she transitioned. Remember, she got to be famous, infamous, if you will, because she tied for 5th place with Riley Gaines. A 5th place finish is not exactly dominating. 4 cis women beat her. So, yes, she did go on to win 1 race in that particular competition, and as her transition has progressed, her times have gone down and down and down as she's lost muscles and so on and so forth. But also, if one's concern is the ability of a person who's gone through a testosterone puberty to, continue to have advantages that HRT doesn't take away, even though there are taller and shorter people, heavier and lighter people, and so on and so forth. There's a range of people who compete in sports. The idea is to make it as fair as possible so it becomes about skill, but whatever. You're just making an argument that we should bend over backwards to let people transition sooner. Because there's this. While people have a moral panic about detransitioners, roughly 1% of all people who transition regret it, and fewer still attempt to reverse it and actually detransition. But there's a second regret rate that doesn't get talked about, and that's the people who wanted to transition but weren't able. That's me. I'm one of those people who had to spend decades living in a way that isn't me, that not only doesn't make me happy, but made me very, very upset. It's hard to sentence somebody to a life of affective torture when we can do something about it and don't. It's cruel. It's inhumane. When we say children shouldn't be able to transition, we're enforcing the wrong puberty on them and then complaining about the supposed physical advantages that they maintain because we made them go through the wrong puberty. And that's not just a double standard. It's not just hypocritical. It's fucking bullshit. I won't get on too high of a horse about that at the moment, because as you all know, I'm a former minister and I can fucking preach on this subject, but we don't have that much time before it's time for Maya's show. So I've said my piece on that. Let's wrap this beastie up.
My father was active in the civil rights movement. My mother went back to school when we were empty nest, and she became a gerontologist. These are 2 fields that are deeply concerned with the health and well-being of fellow members of our society. I grew up in that. I'm their kid, the astrophysicist. So I grew up in that, but my feet were grounded. And in fact, how do you like this pivot? You ready? In fact, I wrote a letter to my parents for their 30th wedding anniversary, where I thanked them for keeping me grounded. And I reproduced that letter.
Oh yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's the book really is fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm not just saying that; it really is a beautiful book.
So if you read that, you will know I could never be full up libertarian.
See, okay, so just because my fans will murder me if I don't just point out, libertarians don't actually just want people to starve in the streets.
Okay, really?
We are big believers. Well,
you do want to feed people.
Yes, social fabric, very important. Taking care of people, giving charity, very, very important. Okay,
right.
So final scientific question for you.
I'm very skeptical about that. Final scientific question. Okay, we may actually finish this one, folks, despite my propensity to tangent.
Obviously, we're doing hot buttons here, so we can get, we have to make sure that our click count is high, obviously. I mean, how else we're going to write a headline here and sell your book? So let's talk about abortion for a second. So when it comes to the scientific study of fetal development, there are people who are militating against, for example, the use of ultrasound techniques in pregnancy clinics. So Planned Parenthood famously objects to people using or government-funded 3D ultrasounds before an abortion. And their suggestion is that this is a violation of the freedom of women. Now, on an abortion level, what pro-lifers say is the science is fairly clear that the inception of life happens at conception, and then there's fetal development all the way continuously from point A basically to death.
No. Just absolutely not. At what point does life begin? Well, that depends on what you mean. Obviously, the ova cell that becomes the zygote is already a living cell. The sperm that fertilizes it is already a living cell. If that weren't true, fertilization wouldn't be possible. So, no, life does not begin at conception. Both components of the zygote are already living. Life is an ongoing process. When you want to talk about an individual, unique human life, well, at what point does that begin? It depends on what you mean. The new unique genetic code is created at conception, but what about the person part? As best we can determine, and there's still a lot of science to be figured out about this, but as best we can determine, this is the one area the Bible seems to actually get it right. Because the Bible describes life as beginning at first breath. And when you want to talk about an individual, unique human beginning a discrete living existence, separate from the mother, able to live on its own, and with the potential to develop unique personhood, that's first breath. That's the moment the placenta is no longer necessary. And we've discovered some very interesting biochemical processes happen the moment a baby takes its first breath. When those lungs bring atmospheric oxygen into them for the first time, it sends a cascade of signals throughout the body. It fires up the prefrontal cortex. It triggers new neurological connections faster than at any other point in life. It turns on neurons. It turns on processors. And it's not just brain stuff either. There's an electrochemical channel that sends a signal to the heart while you're in utero. Your ventricles have an open door between them. You effectively have a 3.5 chambered heart because of the necessity to bypass the lungs while you're in utero, because you're getting your blood through the placenta, or your blood oxygen through the placenta. But at that moment of first breath, when that oxygen hits the lungs, that door in the heart slams shut, never to be opened again. Your system is now fully operational. In many real ways, that first breath is the moment of incarnation of a discrete individual life. And that's kind of amazing. Although, to be clear, I think the Bible probably got that right by accident. Because it doesn't say anything about a door in the ventricles of the heart. There's no predictive power. It's just coincidence. But still. Yeah, so that was the last question. I know we're just about at time. Maya should be going live any moment now. Normally I wait for Maya to start going, but I don't want to have Ben ramble on any further and then have the thing and wind up with us going way the fuck over. So I'm going to start wrapping up. Yeah, Maya should be live any second. So let's go back full screen. Yeah, let's do that. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, people in the live chat, for participating. Even though it got a little bit heated about a couple topics, I still appreciate everybody being here and engaging and discussing issues instead of screaming at each other like, certain individuals might be prone to do. Once again, future people, if you're watching this later, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, because we'd love to see you in the live chat in the future, and that way you'll get notified. Don't forget to hit a like on the way out, and stick around. You will be teleported to Maya's if you are here in the live chat. And if you want to support the channel, subscribing is free, liking is free, sharing is hugely helpful, but there's other ways you can help in the description. You can join memberships, you can join Patreon, which is probably the best way because they take the least. YouTube takes 30%. Patreon is like single-digit percent. I forget what it is off the top of my head. But yeah, there's a few other ways down there too. As the kids always remind me to say, join the Discord. And as always, remember, you don't have to waste your chance to interview a world-famous astrophysicist by asking about trans people and abortion, because you are better than Ben Shapiro.